The future of President Biden's compromise infrastructure plan is murky at best. A bipartisan police reform bill is still very much up in the air, and Senate Republicans have already blocked a sweeping election reform and voting rights effort the House passed in March. But there's one thing that is moving forward that's actually ahead of schedule: the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. The military is reportedly just days away from pulling out all but 1,000 troops who are set to remain in the country to help secure the airport and the U.S. Embassy in the capital city of Kabul. And while in a recent Oval Office meeting, Joe Biden assured the president, Ashraf Ghani, that his country can still count on U.S. support, the Afghan leader emphasized the dangers that American troops are leaving behind.
The Afghans are going to have to decide their future, what they want. But we're going to stick with you, and we're going to do our best to see to it you have the tools you need.
President Biden's decision has been historic. It has made everybody recalculate and reconsider. We are here to respect it and support it. The Afghan nation is an 1861 moment, like President Lincoln, rallying to the defense of the Republic, determined that the Republic is defended.
In other words, the beginning of an all-out civil war. And when U.S. troops are gone, there's serious concern the Afghans who help them will be targeted by the Taliban. In an ad for the group Vote Vets, one former interpreter from Iraq who was able to come to the U.S. after troops pulled out of the base where he served called on the country to protect these interpreters too.
It took many years, but now I'm a U.S. citizen. There are thousands of interpreters in Afghanistan who don't have years to wait. As you withdraw American troops from Afghanistan, do right for the Afghan men and women who serve loyally beside them. Take them too.
Two bills before Congress, the Allies Act and the Honoring Our Promises Expedition for Afghan Special Immigrant Visas, or HOPE for SIVs Act, would make it faster and easier for those interpreters and others, drivers, etc., to come to the U.S. I'm joined now by two of the bills co-sponsored, both former Marines, Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, the 6th District, who served in Iraq 4 tours, and Congressman Jake Auchincloss of District 4, who served in Afghanistan. Congressman, thank you both for being here. I appreciate it.
Good to be here.
Before we get to Afghanistan, just for a minute, I want to talk about what happened today, Congressman Moulton. The House passed a measure implementing a select committee to investigate January 6th after the failure of the bipartisan committee in the Senate. Virtually all Democratic votes, only a couple of Republican votes. Won't the public sees whatever comes out of this select committee as just a partisan hit job on Donald Trump at the end of the day?
No, I think the public knows that it's Republicans who are playing politics with this. And that's why 35 Republicans in the House voted for the bipartisan commission proposed just a few weeks ago. We got fewer votes today because more Republicans have rallied to the defense of Donald Trump. But what we should be defending is the Constitution and our fundamental values and the right of Americans to vote and have their votes counted in our elections.
You know, Congressman Auchincloss, is there any sense that the Republican leader, McCarthy, who thought Trump was responsible for January 6th before he concluded that he wasn't responsible for January 6th, is it even clear that he'll appoint any members to this select committee?
Leader McCarthy had the opportunity to engage productively in this commission, and he chose Trump over truth. The American people are owed accountability and transparency about this attack on our democracy. And with or without Republican support, we're going to deliver an empirical review of what happened and how we can prevent it from happening again.
You know, because of your background as Marines, I really want to focus on what's happening in Afghanistan, gentlemen, with your permission. I just quoted, you heard President Ghani a couple of minutes ago, almost the exact same words were said by the U.S. commander of the mission in Afghanistan, General Austin Miller, just yesterday. He said, civil war is certainly a path that can be visualized if it continues on the trajectory it's on. That should be a concern for the world. Before we talk about our troop withdrawal, Congressman Moulton, I want to talk about the withdrawal of the men and women who help people like you two do your jobs, drivers, engineers, translators, those sort of things. Congressman Moulton, you with a bunch of your colleagues sent a letter to the president earlier this month saying, let's get with it, let's protect these people. It appears, based on the last couple of days, the president is listening, no?
Yes, that's right. And it's clear, based on the past few weeks, that there are a lot of people in the administration who agree with us on this. Secretary Austin and General Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, came before the committee. And when I asked him about this directly, Chairman Milley said, we have a moral imperative to get these guys out. And it's very clear that we don't have time for the regular special immigrant visa process to work. That takes 800 days on average to get a single visa. It's only 80 days to our withdrawal, so we have to evacuate these allies now.
And my understanding is, Congressman Auchincloss, the House passed a measure yesterday that would speed up this process. But it seems to me, as a person who doesn't have your background, just a citizen of this country, the goal is not just to protect these, 18,000 people and their families, maybe as many as 80,000 people, but to assure people we ask to help us in the future in our endeavors that they can trust us. But in light of the fact this is an 11th hour situation, coming just a couple of years after we abandoned the Kurds under Donald Trump, are you worried that that trust in the United States, regardless of what we do here, is frayed?
Trust is absolutely the right word, Jim. I remember as a platoon commander in Afghanistan, as we were patrolling the villages on the Helmand River, I would go home to home and ask for help from the head of the families, ask for help from the village elders, ask for help from the Afghan unit forces and the interpreters who worked with my forces. And with that ask for help came an implicit promise that Americans were going to be there on the other side as well. And we need to honor that promise. As you said, under President Trump, we dishonored that commitment with the Kurds, and we cannot repeat that in Afghanistan.
You know, I think, Congressman Moulton, most of us who haven't lived through what you two lived through don't even understand what these relationships were. But I hope I'm not confusing people. We talked a couple of years ago, you and I, about your translator and the close relationship you had. And I think his name was Mohammed. And if I remember, you actually had a radio show called Moulton and Mohammed. Am I not right about that when you were in Iraq?
Well, it was a TV show, and it was a real hit, Jim, but you've got the basics. Yeah.
Wait, can you briefly describe how intimate and critical that relationship is to men and women who do what you did?
I mean, we spent every minute of the working day together. And I put my life in his hand. He put his life in mine. And we became the closest of friends because of that trust that we had to do our jobs. When his family was threatened, when his life was threatened, he came to me and he said, Seth, what do you think I should do? And I made the case to him that he should continue in his work because it would help his people, that it would help us. And I promised him to have his back. We've made that promise to all these interpreters. And just to put it in stark terms for everybody, what a potential civil war in Afghanistan means, if the Taliban takes over, they will seek out all of our allies, the people who served alongside us, people like Mohammed, and they will kill them. And if they can, they will rape and murder their kids and wives in front of them first. That's what the Taliban does. That's the promise they have made to these American allies. These people aren't just Afghan heroes, they're American heroes too, and we've got to get them out immediately.
And I should have made clear a few minutes ago, even if all this processing can't be done in time, you and apparently the president seem to be sporting a notion that they be taken somewhere, a safe harbor, while the processing goes on. Guam is a possibility. I want to stay with you, Congressman Moulton, for a second. My understanding is you both support this withdrawal, maybe with some caveats, but even if the interpreters and their families are gone, Congressman Moulton, there are a lot of people left behind. Razia John was on this show many times, a local from Massachusetts who opened a girls' school, one of the most inspiring stories I ever heard. What happens to girls and women if the Taliban continues this overrunning of the government in Afghanistan, Congressman Moulton?
I mean, their free lives will end. They won't be able to go to school. They won't be able to participate in the economy or the government. I mean, that's pretty much certain. And, that's a tough pill to swallow for someone who has been very critical of this war, but also recognizes the good that America has been able to do. look, it's clear the president's going to withdraw. There's no changing his mind about that. There's no arguing to keep a few more troops to give the Afghan government a better chance here. So we have to just we have to execute the most honorable withdrawal that we can. And that means saving as many allies for certain execution at the hands of the Taliban before that happens. Some people in the administration seem to be concerned about the image of a mass withdrawal. I can assure you that the image of a mass slaughter would be far worse.
Congressman Auchincloss, the man who orchestrated all this, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, both Iraq and Afghanistan invasions, died in the last 24 hours. What's Rumsfeld's legacy?
Well, he was in public service for many decades, and he's going to have a multifaceted legacy. But his legacy as it relates to Afghanistan and Iraq is engaging the United States in two failed forever wars, two wars that we spent decades on, sunk $6 trillion and tens of thousands of lives into without ever giving the military a clear mission that it could actually execute. It is a testament to political bungling that costs America its standing on the world stage and costs lives and treasure. And now what we need to do is repair America's global standing. We do that with a Marshall Plan for vaccinations that partners with other countries to ensure that we can vaccinate their populations. We do that with increased focus on climate resilience and humanitarian aid and diplomacy. But we need to learn the lessons of these forever wars as we pivot to the Indo-Pacific and ensure that our foreign policy is not going to be a military first one.
I want to return to the lessons very briefly in a second, but quickly, Congressman Moulton, your thoughts on Rumsfeld?
I mean, look, part of his legacy is what you see here today, a generation of Democratic veterans who have decided to run for office to try to change this. I had no intention of ever being in public service when I went into the Marines. In fact, the first job that I took when I got out was in Dallas, Texas, which is not usually where you move if you're planning to run for office in Massachusetts. But at the end of the day, I decided to run because of the failed leadership in Washington that got us into Iraq. And I said, you know what? If people like us who understand this on a visceral level don't stand up and run for office, it's never going to change.
Well, we only have a minute left for each of you, but I'd like you to speak to starting with you, Congressman Moulton, what Congressman Auchincloss mentioned, the lessons. We know what happened in Afghanistan, America's longest war, and on the heels of, at the time of this withdrawal, and while we're discussing helping people who helped us, the president orders an airstrike over the weekend on these Iran-backed militias, which leads a lot of people to ask whether presidents have learned anything about unilateral action, about whether they believe in actually consulting Congress, as I believe they are mandated to do, or is it just more of the same ad infinitum? Congressman Moulton first.
Look, I don't think there's any question that Congress's authority over war and peace has been eroded, partly by the unwillingness of members of Congress to step up and exercise this authority. My understanding of the airstrikes is that they're legal under the War Powers Act, but we have to look carefully at that, and we have to hear from the administration under exactly what legal authority they operated. Look, one of the key lessons about this whole experience of the last 2 decades is that these wars are a lot harder to get out of than they are to get into. And the reason why the founding fathers put the decisions about going to war, about putting our young lives at risk in the hands of the Congress is so that we'll take this seriously. I hope we take it much more seriously in the future.
Are there lessons learned, Congressman Auchincloss?
Yes, and as Seth Moulton said, they're being learned and applied by our generation, especially the veterans. We need to repeal and replace the authorization for the use of military force. We've got to reclaim the war powers from the executive back to Congress. And I believe that we need to cut the Pentagon's budget and to reallocate those funds towards initiatives like climate resilience, global public health, and humanitarian aid that truly prevent conflict before it happens.
Jake Auchincloss, Seth Moulton, thanks so much for your service. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it, gentlemen.
Thank you, Jim.